Continuing over here in the Haggadah of Chaim Kanievsky, and he brings down the following question. It says, as we mentioned last night, that Kol Amarbe B'Sipur Yetzias Mitrayim, anyone who increases the sipur, the telling over of the story of Yetzias Mitrayim, Harezim Meshubach, they are praiseworthy. So he says it seems to be that there's no limit to the amount that you can be Mekayim, that you can fulfill this mitzvah. You can just keep talking about the entire night. So he asks, why is it not included then in the famous Mishnah that says that Elu Dvarim Shein Lahem Shir? These are the things that have no shir, they have no end. There's no amount that's given because it can go on and on and on and on, like we say in the morning. So he brings on over here a machlekes between two great mechutanim. Now, when you hear their machlekes, you'll think about whatever machlekes you have with your mechutanim, and you'll hear the difference between us and between them. So the two great mechutanim in Klal Yisrael are Rav Chaim Kanievsky and Rav Steinmetz, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, both of them. Rav Aaron Leib Steinmetz, I think his oldest son, Rav Shraga, married the daughter of Rav Chaim Kanievsky. So they bring down a machlekes over here on the two of them arguing on what is the answer to this question. Again, the question is that if the Haggadah itself is telling us that the more that you tell over the story of Yetzias Mitrayim, you are praiseworthy. So it seems then that there's no end to the amount that you can tell over the story. So how come it's not included then in the famous Mishnah that says there are certain mitzvahs that have no shir, they have no end, they have no gvul, there's no boundaries. You can that mitzvah is endless. So Aaron Leib says, what? Correct. So you just go straight through. But yet we see that we see though that it says you can talk about it the whole night long. So according to Chaim Kanievsky, you'll talk about it in the middle of the meal. You'll talk about it after everything is over. You'll go until nates, until the morning time. So he brings down that Rav Aaron Leib Steinmetz said the reality is that there is a limit on how you fulfill the mitzvah deraisa, the positive commandment of telling over the sipur Yetzias Mitrayim. And he says that once that you said over all the words that are in the Haggadah, so you fulfilled the mitzvah. It says whoever is marba, whoever increases telling over the story, harezim meshubach, he says, so you should. So a person should try to tell over more of the story and the more of the details and more of the lamdis and more of the amkos, the depth of Yetzias Mitrayim, but you're not getting a mitzvah d'oraisa. It's like almost like a hidden mitzvah. It's a praiseworthy thing that a person is doing. He's beautifying the mitzvah, but you already fulfilled the mitzvah d'oraisa by saying over all of the words that are there inside the Haggadah. So his mechutin, the Rav Chaim Kanievsky comes along and he says, it's not true. He says, in reality, there is no limit to the amount of mitzvah that you can do for sipur Yetzias Mitrayim. And he says, the truth of the matter is, whatever you say over on the night of the Seder, if you're doing it to embellish and to expound upon and to increase the understanding of sipur Yetzias Mitrayim, every word that you say is a kiyum of the mitzvah d'oraisa of sipur Yetzias Mitrayim. So if even after you finish all the words in the Haggadah, but then you're not spending by the Suda, instead of talking about it was much better when Trump was the president, you speak about midrashim and the like, about what it means, sipur Yetzias Mitrayim. So then you'll get more mitzvahs d'oraisa, everything you say. And if after the end of the Haggadah you continue to stay up and you talk more and more and more, it's all mitzvah d'oraisa of sipur Yetzias Mitrayim. How come it's not listed in the Mishnah that speaks about those mitzvahs that ein lahem shir, there's no limit on how that mitzvah can be done? Rav Chaim says that Mishnah doesn't list every single mitzvah that there is that doesn't have a shir, that doesn't have a limit. And therefore this is one of the mitzvahs that don't have a limit, and that's why it's not included in there. That's why you don't see it. That's why you don't see it there. So let's go a little bit further over here. Let's go a little bit further here in the Haggadah. And it says that Shetei Omar Yetzias Mitzrayim Beleilos. We know that there is a mitzvah to mention the Yetzias Mitzrayim, to mention the Exodus every single night. So it says it in the Haggadah, and that means that there is, every time that you say the Shema at night, you're fulfilling a positive commandment of Zecher Yetzias Mitrayim, to remind yourself of Yetzias Mitrayim. So he asks, if that's the case, So then what's the uniqueness about the mitzvah of Zecher Yetzias Mitrayim that we have on the night of the Seder? Every night you're going to say, tonight we're going to say Shema. When you say Shema, inside the Shema it talks about Yetzias Mitrayim. If you think to yourself, or even if you don't think to yourself, when you're saying the Shema, you're getting a mitzvah of Zecher Yetzias Mitrayim. So what is so unique then, when we do it every other night of the year, about the Seder night itself? So he brings over here from Arnhem Steinman, who would start off his Seder every single year with the following understanding from Chaim Soloveitchik. And he says that there's three important differences between the mitzvah of Zecher Yetzias Mitrayim, to remind ourselves of the Exodus that we say every single night, and the Zecher Yetzias Mitrayim, the reminding ourselves, or this, we'll call it the Sipur Yetzias Mitrayim, the telling over the story of the Exodus on the night of Pesach. He says, number one, on the night of the Seder, he said, the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitrayim is to tell over the story in a question and answer form. We have to get ourselves engaged. We ask the questions, Ma'nishtana, they ask the question, we'll give the answer. That's the mitzvah, the way that the Sipur, the story, is supposed to be told. The rest of the year, of course, as we know, we just mention it. We mention it in our Shema at night. Number two, he writes that on the Seder night, we have to have it. There's a whole Seder, there's a whole order in which we discuss Yetzias Mitzrayim. We start Minchila Oivdei Avodah Zarah Hayu Avisein. In the beginning, we were Oivdei Avodah Zarah, we were idol worshippers. Things got very bad. But now Kodesh Baruch Hu brought us close. So we speak about the beginning, the humble beginnings of Klal Yisrael, that we were all involved and entrenched in idol worship. We didn't come from such great stock. But now we are Baruch Hashem, we're Oivdei Hashem, we're close to Hashem. That's the way that has to be. However, the rest of the year, there's no requirement. You just mentioned Yetzias Mitrayim to fulfill your obligation. And the last thing he says is that on the Seder night, so we have to say over the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, we have to mention the Yetzirah, the Exodus of Egypt, with Matzah Umara Lefanav. The Matzah Umara has to be there in front of us on the table. Masha'en Kain, on the rest of the year, there's no such command. You say Shema tonight, nobody has Matzah and Mara in front of them, and you still fulfill the obligation. We'll leave off with one last idea over here. We come to the next paragraph. Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu. Blessed is the Makom, is Hashem, the omnipresent. Baruch Hu is He. Baruch Shenasan Torah LaAma Yisrael. Blessed is HaKadosh Baruch that He gave over the Torah to Klal Yisrael. So Rav Chaim Kanievsky, as was told over by one of his sons, he was a magnificent storyteller. He was, and his kids, when they were younger, they used to love to listen to the stories that their father would tell over. He would make up stories based upon obscure midrashim, and he would excite them with what he had to say. He was teaching them great lessons. So he liked to tell over stories, and one of the stories he liked to tell over was about the tremendous power of Limud Torah. And that's what we're saying, Baruch Shenasan Torah LaAma Yisrael. Hashem is blessed because He gave us the Torah. We don't appreciate the koyach, the power of the Torah. So he said that the Stipler was originally a student in the Novardok yeshiva, and then he became one of the Rosh Yeshivas in Novardok. And the yeshiva every year was always very short on funds. They didn't have a lot of money. And they had a fundraiser who used to go out to different towns and do his best job to fundraise for the yeshiva. So once the fundraiser reaches the city of Karlin, and he comes to the elderly Rav of the community, who was an older Talmud Chacham, whose name was Rav Dovid Friedman. And he comes into the home of the Rav, and the Rav is sitting there, an old man. He's poring over a Gemara. And the fundraiser is looking at this elderly man, just learning and learning and learning. He was transfixed by the sight of this elder Rav. After a while, Rav Dovid looks up at his guest, and he says, Shalom Aleichem, how can I help you? So the man says, I'm a representative of the Novardok yeshiva, and I came to town to raise money for the yeshiva. So Dovid pulled out a donation, he gave it to the fundraiser, and he went back to learning the Gemara. The fundraiser was mesmerized by this old man, the way that he was learning with Azab Bren, such a fire. He just stood there transfixed, watching him. Some time passes, and the Rav looks up again, and he says, Shalom Aleichem, how can I help you? So he says, I'm a representative of the Vardik Yeshiva. I came to the town to raise money. So once again, he reaches into his pocket, he pulls out money, and he gives it to the fundraiser. The fundraiser, instead of leaving at this point, he just can't stop watching this Yid learn Torah, and he's transfixed. He's just watching and watching and watching. More time passes, and Reb Dovid looks up from the Gemara again, and he says, Shalom Aleichem, how can I help you? So at this point, he gets a little bit embarrassed, the young man, and he says, I'm sorry, Rebbe. He said, I explained to you already, I came here collecting for the Nevardik and Yeshiva. You're very kind. You already gave me 2 donations. I just standing here watching you learn. That's why I didn't leave yet. Please don't give me anything else. So Reb Dovid looks at the fundraiser and he tells him the following. He says, you have to understand, I'm a very old man. He says, I can't remember one thing from 1 minute to the next. I don't even remember that you came here. I don't remember that I gave you a donation. Certainly I don't remember that I gave you a donation twice. Please forgive me. He says, but I want you to know one thing. There's one thing in this world that I've never forgotten. And he points to his Gemara and he says, every single word of Torah I learned in my life, I still remembered as clear as day. And he says, that's all that I have left is the Torah that I have up here. The fundraiser was amazed by this statement. Imagine a man who he doesn't remember anything, but remembers all of his Torah. He goes to the next town. He ends up in Radin by the Chaim, and he tells the Chaim the Maisa, and the Chaim was blown away as well that a person could forget everything, but the Torah was so dear and so precious, and that he didn't forget a single word. Shortly after this, Reb David Friedman was nifter, and the Chaim called upon this fundraiser and he said, you must be masbid, you must eulogize this man, this Rav David Friedman. He said, I'm not to eulogize. He said, just get up and tell the story. Everybody should hear what the koyach HaTorah, what the power of Torah is. That a Yid could forget everything he has in his life, but the Torah, that a person doesn't, that he didn't forget. We forget, but that this person himself did not forget. Okay, we'll continue, Bez Hashem.